Just a quick, very quick piece of personal background. I was a family therapist, an intergenerational systems family therapist for 20 years. Went through a vocational change, and for the last 30 years, I've been a community leader and organizer in civil society, primarily in New Orleans, my home city, but I also did a brief stint in Chicago under the supervision of one of the masters of community organizing. And while I did that work, first psychotherapy and then community organizing, I was always based in a university. So I had one foot in the academy and one foot in the city. I didn't set out to do that, but that's the way it happened. And for me, they began to feed off each other. And I hope a little bit of that will come through in my presentation this afternoon. Race is certainly the focus of intractable conflict in the United States, not the sole focus, but certainly the most visible one and the most divisive one. If I could just give a quick example of that divisiveness, New Orleans, once upon a time, was second only to New York City as an economic powerhouse. And now there are now New Orleans is struggling financially. It wouldn't even be in the top 20 economically, I don't think. While cities around us that were once pretty, a lot less successful than New Orleans, I'm thinking of San Antonio, I'm thinking of Houston, I'm thinking of Atlanta, they have become powerhouses while we languish. And in my view, the reason is that they've come to terms with race and related issues, and New Orleans has not. It's like a governor that stops our city from moving forward. Okay, so let me proceed. Seeing race as we are, antagonism, avoidance, and acknowledgement. Antagonism and avoidance are what we typically have around race in the US. And when we get a terrible incident like the murder of George Floyd, they both go up. They both go up. So it's gone up and it's moved back down, and when there is another terrible incident, they'll go back up again. It's just pretty much completely predictable that that will be the case. That line, prelude, it says, interpretation, the form of life. So part of the reflection that I mentioned was being led to the conclusion a while ago that interpretation is the form of life. It's the form that life takes, and we'll see, what I mean by that as we go forward. Then the famous saying from the Talmud, we do not see things as they are, we see them as we are. Now, of course, that's an overstatement because we don't just see them as we are, we also see them as they are, but you see the message there about how easy it is for our own perceptions to block us from really actually seeing another person. So, the form of interpretation, what do I mean by that? Awareness shaped in evolutionary and historical experience makes possible and limits our comprehension of present circumstances. That's always the case in my view. What we inherit from the past makes possible and limits our comprehension of the present. Our knowing of present circumstances makes possible and limits our options for acting within them. We act, the world reacts. Our awareness and the whole web of relationships out of which it continually emerges are transformed. The you I see is never complete. It is always my apprehension of you as processed through my life experience filters, and the reverse is also true. So when you think you have someone, beware, because you don't. In principle and psychologically, it's not possible. Interpretation in the form of life. A famous sociologist from the University of Chicago, W.I. Thomas, wrote that if men define situations as real, they are real in their consequence. The Canadian philosopher Charles Taylor called all that stuff we bring our background understandings. And the reason he did that was that that's where they stay. They stay in the background, and it takes something unusual, like a crisis or graduate school or a CRIC conference, to get those to come to the surface. So what these background understandings, I think they're worth just focusing on for a minute, because they drive interpretation, and interpretation drives action. So these are very important things in terms of how human beings put together our lives. So ambient background sound, it's like, that's what it's like. We're talking about something cognitive here, conscious here, or not conscious here, but it's like ambient sound. It's pre-framing our sense of what is happening right now. So the past is pre-framing, making possible and limiting what's happening right now. It's evolutionary. Scott and others have worked on this. The notion, Pascal Boyer, that there are these, Boyer calls them intuitive inference systems that are not learned. They're part of our evolutionary inheritance. And then they're historical. And I put there the linguistic character of experience, a famous line from the German philosopher Gadamer, who just made the point very powerfully that human experience passes through language. There's no experience which isn't conditioned by the language of the experiencer. Okay, so with that in mind, and those things are in mind for me when I interact with people, I'm calling this 8 ways of seeing race. There are the anti-racists, there are the progressives, there are the pragmatists, there are the conservatives, the white supremacists, the black nationalists, Antifa, the anti-fascists, and there are the anarchists. And someone else might find a different group or a different label, and that's fine. This is just how these are just the ones that I encounter in my work. And just quickly through each one of them, the anti-racists. They're very visible. The press loves the anti-racists. Their visibility and their being loved by the press is out of all proportion to what they produce, what they actually do in communities. And this sentence, on my reading anyway, this would be the absolute center of anti-racist thinking. This is ground zero. This is their deal. This is their thing. This is what they believe. If undoing racist policies and practices is not your primary commitment, you are a racist. That's what they say. That's what they believe. If I say, I'm at work on the climate crisis, or I'm at work on women's health, or I'm at work on whatever else, the answer is, then you are a racist. And it's not so much that line; it's the spirit of it that I want to hold up to you. It does not sit well with people of goodwill and good faith who have time and energy to actually work on many of the things that the anti-racists are concerned about. I think you can just kind of sense the difficulty there if you just look at it for a minute. Progressives. These are the people who believe that you should not let the perfect drive out the good, sort of a classic line. And another classic line, that half a loaf will feed a hungry person. The pragmatists say things like, act together on matters of common interests and values. Do not focus on what divides you. Most of the powerful community organizations in the United States do not talk about race. They talk about schools, or they talk about police, or they talk about the things that bring them together for change. The second one, judge the value of an effort by the impact of the action on the well-being of the actors and on the common good. That's how they judge their outcomes. Conservatives, living individuals are not responsible for the deeds of their ancestors. I am solely responsible for my actions and their outcomes, and there is no such thing as society. I think we know where that one came from. There's no such thing as society. White supremacists. The Jews will not replace us. They believe that a great replacement is underway and that they are the ones to be replaced. I put that text because it's kind of like a scripture almost in a way, the protocols of the learned elders of Zion. A young man pulled into a supermarket in Buffalo, New York, several months ago and killed 10 people. And they found a 180-page written commentary on the protocols of the elders of Zion in his car. So this document is circulating out there. I think it probably circulates a lot like a totem. I'm not sure how many people read it, let alone write 180-page dissertations on it, but it's out there. Black nationalists. Power concedes nothing of value voluntarily. For better and for worse, the life chances of African Americans is strongly connected with the effectiveness and integrity of black institutions. Antifa, confront fascism by all means necessary. Anarchists challenge authority, and it really stands for the liberation of the human mind from the dominion of religion, the liberation of the human body from the dominion of property, and liberation from the strictures and restraints of government. Okay, I'd like to quickly go deeper into 4 of those ways, the anti-racists. And this is my interpretation. Anti-racist, it's a movement, it's not an organization. It reacts to events, doesn't pursue a strategy for change. It reacts to events, really what I mean is rather than pursuing a strategy for change. It's reactive. That's why I said when the next big thing happens, it will be there. But right now, it's not too clear where they are or what they're doing. And that their way of approaching, really not approaching strategy, made me think of that famous line from Sun Tzu. Tactics without strategy are the noise before defeat. They're undisciplined and ineffective in affecting and sustaining policy change. One of the most unproductive creations of a public policy in the heat of the moment was defund the police. Defund the police. Of course, it wasn't a policy at all. It was just kind of a chant. It was an expression of anger and hurt. But the effect that it actually had was to get some people who were their allies in Congress defeated, and the right just jumped right on that. And you'll still hear that, defund the police, even though, as I say, it wasn't a serious policy statement. I find their organizing tactics unethical. One of them is called personalize and polarize. It comes from the work of Saul Alinsky, who was indebted to the great labor leader, John Lewis. Personalize and polarize means pick out an institution that you want to take control of, vilify and humiliate and embarrass and accuse the leader of the organization of things which you know very well aren't true. And by undermining the leader, you undermine the institution, and then it's an easier target to deal with. And then I already touched on this one. Fallacious, what I would call fallacious ethical thinking. Are you an anti-racist? No, but I work against racism, then you're a racist. Conservatives, and I interact with all these people pretty intensively, and I have for some years in New Orleans, including the anti-racists. Conservatives, fierce advocates for individual freedom and responsibility. Their default position tends to be pro-institution. This is a real strength and plus. They are willing to call out difficulties in the African American community which white liberals evade. We cannot deal with what's wrong in New Orleans unless we deal with child poverty, unless we deal with multi-generations of families where no one has had a job. It's not a popular topic in the black community, but nonetheless, I think it has to be dealt with. I think conservatives fail to take seriously enough how historic events affect people's life chances before birth and through death today. In other words, they don't take racism seriously enough, I don't think. And then possessive individualism, that's what I have, it's mine, it's solely mine, it's strictly mine. It negates claims for, or ways of thinking, ways of acting for just societies. Pragmatists build strategies and develop tactics focused around shared materials and devotion to values. The question that can turn individuals into groups, groups into organizations, and organizations into movement is this: what really matters that we might actually achieve together that we have been unable to achieve separately? That's kind of the golden question. There's really no reason to organize unless you have an answer to that, except just for maybe socializing, which is, a good thing too. What really matters that we might actually achieve together that we have been unable to separately. This is not an academic question. Okay. This is my last main slide here. A slash through the circle indicates that, in my experience, this group is not available to work on broad-based community organization where there are multiple points of view. The anti-racists do not show an ability to do that. What they show is an ability to want people to follow them, and that's not organizing, that's something else. Progressives are able to do that. Pragmatists are able to join in, multi-group, multiracial, interfaith organizing. Conservatives are able to do that. White supremacists are not. Black nationalists are, and they do. Antifa does not, and the anarchists do not. That's a rough summary of my experience of it anyway. Okay. In closing, so what generates energy to fuel interracial action networks seeking the common good? The religious thinker and philosopher Martin Buber offers this: the basis of our lives together is twofold, and it is one: the wish of every person to be confirmed by others, even as they can confirm them, and the innate capacity in us to confirm other people in this way. That this capacity lies so immeasurably fallow constitutes the real weakness and questionableness of the human race. Actual humanity exists only where this capacity unfolds, and the capacity there is mutual confirmation, meaning confirmation of the interests and the values of the other. And then Buber said somewhere else, all real living is meeting. The Roman playwright Terentius Afer wrote, nothing human can be alien to me. And so the question, what generates energy to fuel transformative interracial action networks? And the answer is mutual acknowledgement of sacred values and material interests. When that sort of mutual recognition begins to happen, there's a special energy that appears in the world that can do things. I just want to let you know that Hassan Davoklu and his team and I have been, and Dylan made reference to this yesterday, we've started some work on race relations on social media, and this is just a little preview of what I hope we'll share next year. That's about 2 months old now, I think. 300,000 users and 738,000 retweets. That's what it looks like. When you do, when you find the form, as we saw yesterday, and do the coloring, this is what race relations looks like. All Lives Matter was the name we chose because when we did the word frequency sort, that one came up, and it came up in a kind of a constellation with a bunch of other related ones. So the blue is the people who say all lives matter. The red are the people who say Black Lives Matter. And then barrier-bound members of this network are people who only talk to other people within their own group, and barrier crossings are ones that cross over. So this is from one point of view, this is race relations today. And we're going to continue our analysis, but we're also, the reason for the analysis is partly to figure out a way to influence what's going on there. Yeah, no, that's a great question. In my experience, there's a huge number of people who would love to feel that they're doing the right thing about race, that they're making a difference. And I'm talking about many, many white people. But what they're not going to do is take a scolding from the anti-racists about how they're racist. It's just not, you can't build what needs to be built by that. So, you know, and my sense is that the challenge is to, one of my friends says, find something that people enjoy or believe in and encourage them to do it across racial lines. That's one of the things that we're thinking about. Maybe we'll create an online conversation, not about racism and anti-racism, but about something else related to race. And yeah, so that's as far as, we're just trying to get a handle on the information right now. You know, we've had good mention, as we had before, of the notion of values, and I think, Scott, that has a lot to do with your notion of sacred values and devoted actors kind of getting into our consciousness here. And, you know, in terms of sacred values, there are, you know, my own orientation in that regard, I would say it's biblical, and I would say it's specifically prophetic. For example, when Jeremiah says in chapter 29, seek the well-being of the city where I have sent you into exile and pray to the Lord on its behalf, for in its well-being you will find your well-being. I run into those kinds of motivations in people in this work, not just the leaders, all the time. Maybe it's charity, maybe it's you know, unionism, but there's something driving people. It's not just an idle activity that they're involved in here. So I appreciate that, Scott, those thoughts.